been practicing my own brand of mindfulness since being introduced to the writings of Anthony DeMello back in the 1970s. And if anyone knows of Anthony DeMello, I'll be a little bit surprised and also excited to hear that. But so what you're going to get tonight is my version of mindfulness. Now, I prefer, and you'll find that I interchange the word awareness with mindfulness, as I actually prefer the word awareness. I think it's more descriptive of what it is that we're looking for. Mindfulness is a little like swimming in the ocean. You can go as deep as you want. We're going to go about ankle deep tonight, because that's about how much time we have for it. But mark my words, we are still in the ocean, and it'll be up to you to decide how far you want to go with it. The real beauty of mindfulness is to find greater degrees of inner peace. That, for me, is what motivates my practice, is just that whole business of inner peace. Inner peace is the springboard for many positive emotions that we experience, not the least of which joy, contentment, humor, satisfaction with one's life, freedom, lightness of being, all begin at the doorstep of peace. So, without further ado, let's wade into this ocean called mindfulness. So I want to start by having a look at a sentence. And I don't know if there's any former English teachers here, but if you look at a sentence like, I have a thought. Well, if you just kind of examine that sentence, what is it that we see? Well, it seems to me what we see is we see an I that has a thought. Now, we don't customarily think that way, that, oh, there's an I and there's a thought, and they're two separate things. You know, in a way, we can at least arbitrarily look at it in a separate sort of way if we cast our mind to do so anyway. Thoughts are something that I have. I have thoughts. Technically, one could say, I am not my thoughts. Now that's something that's kind of, it's not something we would hear very often, most of us anyway. It seems unusual to think of it that way. But if you go back to the sentence, I have a thought, that's exactly what it's saying. I have a thought. We've been really, if you think about it, we as a culture, we've been taught to identify our very self, our identities, with the thoughts that we have, the thoughts we have about ourselves, the stories we tell ourselves. Another way of looking at our identity is to think about our identity is our awareness. And I would suggest that our awareness is actually the deepest part of who we are. Now that's kind of a new way for most of us, for many of us, to see ourselves. Where is it that we attach our identity? Is it in the awareness, or is it in the thoughts we have? And that's where we begin. We could ask, where do thoughts even come from? Part of the goal of mindfulness is really to become a student of our own thoughts. For example, how do thoughts actually serve us? Do we have to believe all of our thoughts? Well, that's a novel thought. Do we have to believe all our thoughts? What's the relationship between our awareness and our thoughts? I would suggest these are all questions worth having, worth entertaining. All right, moving on. How many of you as kids, as little 10-year-olds or 12-year-olds, went to scary movies. Anyone? Okay. Well, I know that I went to scary movies. I ran in a pack of 4 young lads, and going to scary movies was a way for us to prove our manhood. And so we'd go to scary movies, and one of the things that we learned very quickly is we mastered a skill of taking a step back from the movie screen. Now, if you think about that, that was a very unique ability, a very unique human ability to take that step back from the movie screen. Animals, to our best of our knowledge, don't do that. Not only can we take a step back from the movie screen, we can even change what we focus on as part of our human ability. So, for example, while I'm sitting at the movie, I can look up at the lights. I can take that step back from the movie screen. I can look at the lights. I can look at my neighbors who are oohing and awing and be in amusement at how much it's frightening them. I can smell the popcorn. I can bring myself back to my present moment and just sit in my chair and just focus on oh, this is a good movie, knowing that at that movie theater I have the ability to jump back into the movie and enjoy the movie, or I can step back out again if it gets too scary. And that's a real nimbleness. That's a real ability that we have to take that step in and a step out of our situation there. So if you look at this handout, the horizontal line going across represents the horizon. Above the line is sky, and below the line is land. Now we're going to pay attention to above the line where we have the sky, and we also happen to have clouds in the sky. Now I'm the master of corniness, so you're going to have to tolerate this a little bit. And I'm going to have one corny thing after another, so just bear with me on this. So just so you know, upsetting thoughts are really the opposite of inner peace. And that's why we're going to focus on upsetting thoughts. If what we want to do is look at what about upsetting thoughts, what upsetting thoughts do to us. Now, everyone has their own brand or their own themes of upsetting thoughts. And there's usually 2 different styles of upsetting thoughts. There's the more anxious, worrisome kinds of upsetting thoughts, and then there's angry, frustrating kinds of upsetting thoughts. And then you'll kind of adapt that to your own life in terms of your themes. But we're gonna look at and take anxious thoughts as an illustration here and see if this makes sense. So, what I'm suggesting is you may be just going through your normal day, and maybe it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and all of a sudden, out of somewhere called nowhere, you start to have an upsetting thought. Now, as you have that upsetting thought, you have a choice. Now, it's a choice whether you know it's a choice or not, but it is nevertheless a choice. And the choice is whether to pay attention to that upsetting thought or to simply let it pass. Now, the reality is thoughts are a lot like clouds. Clouds come somewhere from the west, they're right here in front of us, and then they disappear to the east. And by and large, they're in motion. Thoughts are that way if we notice our thoughts, of course. Thoughts are in motion. So, all right, so out of nowhere or somewhere comes this upsetting thought. Okay, so now we're going to pay attention. We decide, okay, we're going to pay attention to that thought, see what it has to say to us. Now, at the moment then you decide to pay attention to it, it's like we lasso onto that thought and we pull it into our consciousness. Because again, remember, thoughts have a way of just moving through, but we have to deliberately pull it into our consciousness for us to focus on it. So when we start to focus on that upsetting thought, we start to have related thoughts to that original upsetting thought. And so it's like that cloud grows in size, if that makes sense. And as it grows in size, it also then triggers related kinds of thoughts. So it might trigger an anxious, worrisome kind of a thought. And same choice. Do I bring it into my consciousness, or do I simply let it pass? Because again, thoughts are always in motion. It takes effort to bring thoughts into focus. We bring it in, we develop now more thoughts about that original anxious, worrisome thought. Now the other thing, as a side note to this, when we start having like anxious, worrisome thoughts, what does it create? It creates anxious, worrisome feelings. And once we start to have feelings about things like, things that make us anxious, it feels more real to us. And that's thoughts feel real, and they are, of course, and on one level, so are feelings. But feelings have a greater depth to them, which hook us more. And that's what we're looking for, is what hooks us, in a sense. Okay, lastly, it might trigger something, like a discouraged, depressed kind of thought, and that would be a normal, progression from an upsetting kind of generic thought to an anxious thought to a more of a discouraged, depressed kind of a thought. And so let's just suggest that, okay, that too we're going to pay attention to. So I'm going to pull that discouraged, depressed kind of a thought into my consciousness, and I'm going to focus on that as well. Now, at the end of the day, what's happened? Well, what's happened is I have now a completely cloudy sky. Corny. But it's a completely cloudy sky. And what does that mean? It means that we're no longer aware that I'm a thinker having thoughts, if you in fact had that in the beginning. We can literally become lost in our thoughts, right? That's a normal occasion, a normal experience for all of us, I think, is to get lost in our thoughts. So we may even be driving down the highway and we want to turn off at a certain exit, and say we're wanting to turn off at the Somerset exit, and we drive right by it. Now the exit was still there, it's just that we missed it. How did we miss it? Well, we were lost in our thoughts. And that's a normal, everyday, of course, experience for all of us. Now, so what are we going to do with all that? This is where I'm trying to put more meaning into it. We want to start to notice when we're having upsetting thoughts. We're not going to try to change those thoughts. We just want to notice when we're having upsetting thoughts. That's interesting. To have some curiosity about your upsetting thoughts. See what they do. See what they create for you. Are they redundant? Do they keep reoccurring? Is this the 45th time I've thought that? Kind of like the person who's going to go to the dentist in a month and going to have a tooth extraction and begins to think about that tooth being extracted in a month, keeps going back to it. That's an upsetting thought, that just keeps coming back. Second question we might ask ourselves then is, are the thoughts that I'm having, are these upsetting thoughts useful, or are they useless to me? Are they helpful in some ways? We can't presume that all thoughts are helpful. And that's an important qualification then. Is the thought I'm having helpful? Because here's the thing. Every time I have an upsetting thought and I go for the run on these upsetting thoughts, what does it do to my inner peace? No more for that. It's kind of like if you think about your inner peace as calm waters, upsetting thoughts are like taking a handful of pebbles and throwing them into the calm waters. And what does it do but ripple it all up, and you no longer have inner peace. So what we're talking about is protecting our inner peace. And so what we want to do, we want to get a toehold, so to speak, on our upsetting thoughts. When are we having them? Are they useful? We need to find ways to remind ourselves, to catch ourselves having upsetting thoughts. That becomes very crucial to the practice here. Now, certainly, a daily meditation practice is the best way to learn to monitor our thoughts. And quite honestly, if you can dedicate 20 minutes a day, most people would say that's pretty optimal, is a 20-minute a day meditation, which allows us to slow down our thought process, which is what we want to be able to do. The reality is that that's something we have to carve out for ourselves, and a lot of people have to really be, it has to be kind of a nagging interest of theirs that keeps hounding them to, I really should meditate, and eventually maybe they do. I know that's what happened to me back in the day. If you don't adopt a formal meditation process, there are other ways to learn this. And we need to be able to plant the intention of noticing myself having upsetting thought. And this is quite easy. We do this all the time. Now, if I say to myself, I want to remember when I have an upsetting thought. I want to be able to tune into myself having upsetting thoughts whenever they occur. Really, all I need to do is plant that thought in the back of my mind, and oftentimes then through practice, boom, it just shows up. And that's one of the wonderful things about our mind, is we can plant those kinds of seeds in the back of our mind to remember, I want to notice upsetting thoughts. You wouldn't have to keep pounding on your forehead and say, I got to remember upsetting thoughts. It wouldn't have to be quite that dramatic. I like to go back to my boyhood experience because there's a lot of simplicity about that. My friends and I like to set up a Kool-Aid stand. And of course, we were interested in making a little extra money. What would happen if, while I was sitting there with my friends at this Kool-Aid stand selling Kool-Aid, and some guy comes along and he says to me, hey, little boy, I'll give you $0.25 for every green car that you see drive by today. Now, let's assume this guy's on the up and up. We have to assume that. Well, the reality is I'd be interested in that because I'd be interested in getting that $0.25. Now, the reality is I could be sitting at my Kool-Aid stand, and anytime a green car comes by, kaboom, I would notice that green car most of the time. And that's an example of how we can plant that idea in our mind to notice these things. Now, this is a practice that you have to nurture, and you have to nurture it day by day. And as you nurture it day by day, you'll actually get better at noticing upsetting thoughts. And then you begin to see how my upsetting thoughts really affect my inner peace. And gee whiz, I like being at peace. And I want to protect that inner peace. In fact, I think it's one of the most important things about my life that I can protect. My experience is to protect that inner peace. There's a couple of other fine details. Let's also presume that you're interested in freight trains for whatever reason. And you find out that there's going to be a freight train coming by out in the countryside one day, and you want to be able to see and watch that freight train as it goes by. So you find out that it's going to come by around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And so you drive out there, out to the place, the railroad tracks where it's going to be. You get out of your car and you got this little this little sign that says stop on the sign. It's got a short handle. Now let's say that, okay, it's 2:45 and you go stand on the railroad tracks. And what do you notice? Well, the train's coming, but it's out in the rural area, so it's coming pretty fast. It's probably coming 50 miles an hour out there. But you're standing in the railroad track, and as it gets closer, you hold up your little dinky sign that says stop on it. Now, the question is, will that train be able to stop? And of course, no, it's just going to smoosh right over the top of you. And that's the thing about upsetting thoughts. If they get a momentum going, it's harder and harder to stop them, to put them at a stop, because they have so much momentum. You've now created great storylines, connected with your upsetting thoughts. So the closer you can catch them to the beginning, the easier, not easy, but easier it is to catch them. So on the other hand, if you go down to the freight yard and the train is parked, and now you want to go in front of the freight train, and he pulls ahead a couple of feet, and as he's pulling ahead, now you put up your stop sign. Is the train going to be able to stop at that point? And of course the train is, because there's no momentum. So again, the closer we're able to catch an upsetting thought before it takes root, the easier it is to catch them. And again, this is all part of a practice that we can employ if it makes sense to us to protect our inner peace. And so it's a matter of, is inner peace an important part of our life? Now, I would suggest that our inner peace is part of our natural state. Some of us have been out of inner peace for so long we don't even realize that anymore. But it's really there, and we can nurture that inner peace within ourselves. We all have dramas, and we all have events of life. And when we do, we create and react to the commentaries that we use to describe those events and dramas of life. Now, we're meaning-seeking creatures, so we create these stories about these events. And some of them are neutral, some of them are positive. We don't need to worry about those. But sometimes we create stories that are quite negative or hostile, or they take us out of our natural state of well-being. And again, this is all about monitoring our sense of well-being and our sense of peace. So when we react and we create these commentaries, again, we have a choice. This time our choice is, and this is stated kind of strongly, but we can become victims of our own emotions and our thoughts about those commentators, or we can take a step back and witness these storylines as they develop. If we become a victim to it, it leads us to more upset, and then we can get to the Mark Twain quote that kind of says it all as well, that I'm an old man now and have had many problems, most of them never happened. And oftentimes that's where we're at. Now, as we take this step back, if we take that choice, we're allowing our thoughts to fade into silence. Because again, thoughts are always in motion. And thoughts are here to serve us. Thoughts are very important. I don't want to minimize the value of thoughts. I couldn't make a cup of coffee in the morning without having thoughts. Thoughts are useful for problem solving, and our brains were made for thinking. So, thoughts are very, valuable in the right context, but they can also lead us astray. And so what we're trying to do is just simply become more aware of that, and to see that, that not all thoughts are created equal. Now, if we take a step back, we can, one way of helping ourselves as well is to take a deep breath. Of course, breathing, has a naturally relaxing component to it, and it allows us to ground ourselves into the present moment. I got to tell you about my old dog, Max. I used to have a golden retriever. He was a great dog, good family dog. And Max was a kind of a dog that, he could be laying down taking a nap, and I swear, if you threw out a bone or threw out a stick, he had to go fetch that stick. Now, I'd suggest that he didn't have a choice but to fetch that stick. He was bred for that. Now, the reality is, as people, we have more freedom than that. We don't have to fetch the stick. We don't have to follow every thought that comes into our mind. What we need to start doing is become more aware, and we become more aware by focusing in on the present moments of life. If you observe your mind, you'll notice that it either dwells in the past or it fixates on what's next. Our mind has no time to waste. It needs to find things that are potential threats, or it looks for problems to solve. That isn't a bad thing unless it is. And it can be a bad thing if it leads us into places that we don't really need to go. And so again, it's about being aware of my choices here. You'll notice that our mind is easily bored. And in that stillness, it can race about looking for something to fill it. That's, again, you notice that for yourself, as you continue to be more of a student of your own thoughts. My mind can be afraid to be present to now. That's an interesting idea, and one that you might just have to try on to see. It's afraid of what might be perceived as emptiness. Emptiness sometimes can be found in now. Peer inward during times when you have the opportunity to view stillness or emptiness. In a surprising way, sometimes we find beauty. And we can find a sense of delight in the emptiness. So it ends up surprising us with what is possible by looking at the present moment when it starts to feel like emptiness and boredom, and our mind wants to race ahead. Sometimes just to bring ourselves back to that has very interesting rewards to it. The mind is not prone to trust life. So it tends to thrash about looking for potential threats. The mind is always vigilant. The mind does not want to believe that life has its own way of working out. So our mind tends to over-prepare, becoming vigilant. This disturbs any semblance of inner peace. Again, it's creating that handful of pebbles thrown into calm waters. The mind is always looking to create more meaning out of things, so it doesn't have to deal with emptiness. It's amazing and uncanny the way we flee emptiness. And it's also ironic that it's probably the least thing we need to fear and to flee. There's something that I've kind of named the three-step process for driving ourselves crazy. Step number one, we say to ourselves, what if? And we say, what if, and we fill in that sentence with the absolute worst thing we can think of, the most dire consequence we can have to a what if. What if the sky falls tomorrow? What if? Now, the moment we do that with step number 1, we employ our imagination, which is step number 2. And step number 2 is our imagination goes to work in living color and imagines what we just what if'd. And in doing that, in living color, step number 3 is then we drive ourselves crazy. We give ourselves a case of the bejeebies based on what we just frightened ourselves into. Again, it's just another little example of how our mind is overactive and it's always looking to get ahead of the game. And in getting ahead of the game, we get further behind, I would like to suggest. This is something I call meditations on now, and it's something that comes out of my own reflections. Something about now is nurturing when it is found. It tends to be overlooked. Now is present. It touches stillness, no worries, and is often joyful. There is a lightness of being in now. Now does not get lost in the outer circumference of life, the trivias, the outside dramas that don't amount to a hill of beans. There's a serenity to now. Now demands nothing, it simply is. The experience of now is an experience of a deeper reality. Now can lead to an awareness of the connection to a greater whole. And lastly, I am now. This last one is a little more than ankle deep in the ocean. The simple conclusion that I would like to leave you with is this. We find inner peace by valuing inner peace. I protect my peace and sense of well-being from upsetting thoughts that aren't worth engaging in. It's a choice, it's a deeply human choice, and it's where real freedom exists. Mindfulness is all about being nimble with what we choose to think. We don't have to go every place our thoughts take us. That's a novel thought for some of us. We all have skills, we have these abilities. It's just a matter of being more deliberate in using these abilities. We have this ability to take that step back. We have the ability to ask ourselves, is this a thought worth having? If anyone is further interested in this subject, a very good book is one by John Kabat-Zinn called Mindfulness for Beginners. Some of you may be aware of him if you've looked into mindfulness at all. He really actually coined the phrase mindfulness. And he's got tons of books out. But this is really a good one, for starters, because it's like in two-page themes, and they're just easy to read, and they make total sense. So that's something to consider.